مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. في مقبرة أرلينغتون الوطنية التي دفن فيها العديد من أبطال أمتنا يقام احتفال فريد من نوعه بعد اختيار مجموعة من الجنود وتدريبهم خصيصا للقيام بهذه المهمة. يرتدون زيهم العسكري الأفضل ويتبادلون الأماكن مع مجموعة أخرى من الجنود، وذلك الهمية كبر الجندي المشهور. مئات آلاف السياح يأتون كل عام لمشاهدة هذا الاحتفال. يطلق عليه اسم تغيير الحرس ويحدث كل ساعة يوميا. للكونغرس احتفال تغيير الحرس الخاص به، إلا أنه نادر الحدوث وأحيانا يحدث مرة في كل عقد وأحيانا أقل من ذلك. ومع تقاعد المتحدثة في مجلس النواب نانسي بيلوسي وتقاعد القيادة الديمقراطية بأكملها ووصول قيادة جمهورية جديدة إلى السلطة، فإن هذا التغيير في السلطة التشريعية سيحدث الآن. لشرح كيفية تبديل القيادة داخل مجلسي الشيوخ والنواب وما يعنيه ذلك لإدارة بايدن والسياسة الأمريكية، يسعدني أن أرحب بثلاثة مراقبين سياسيين مرموقين: ديفيد دراكر وجون أولدريتش وأرني ساغز. Welcome back to Dakhel Washington. We're now a month or so after America's midterm elections. And except for one more election that we will get to in just a couple of minutes, the results are known and the reverberations have begun to settle in. The conventional wisdom has defined the result in three ways: about as good as it gets for Democrats, given everything else going on. Donald Trump had the reverse Midas touch, with most of his candidates that he backed losing, and our nation remains deeply and almost evenly divided. Let's take a look at each of these theses. I'm delighted to have David Drucker and Ernie Suggs with me to help explain all the politics. So first, the Democrats. Ernie, is this, with Biden at around 40% approval, is this as good as it gets?
I think it was not expected. I think the Democrats came out of the election happy. They still control the Senate. They did not lose the House by that much, as you mentioned, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit more. We have a big race here in Georgia that both parties are looking at very intently. So I think it was, I think that the Democrats came out of the November elections very happy. They knew they were probably going to lose the House. They didn't lose it by the astronomical numbers that a lot of pundits predicted. And I think that they came out pretty well.
And David, for Republicans, are the knives out for Donald Trump, or is his hold on a large piece of the party so tight that he still remains the boss?
Well, it's a little of both. The knives are out for Donald Trump when you look at certain quarters of the party that had been hesitant to criticize him and that are really after his job as the titular leader of the party and the desire to be the front runner for the Republican nomination in 2024. There are a number of Republicans that were looking at running in 2024 very cautiously, very warily, fearing that Donald Trump was simply unbeatable. After the Republicans' poor performance in the midterm elections, due in large part, many Republicans think, because of flawed general election candidates that were backed by Donald Trump, there is a desire to move on from him and more of a willingness to criticize him. However, where we see hesitancy still and some fealty to Donald Trump still is among Republicans on Capitol Hill, particularly in the House of Representatives, where, given the way the districts are drawn for the House, and given how the grassroots still feels about Donald Trump, Republicans in the House, including the leadership, are hesitant to call out Trump for his failures or perceived failures, and are very hesitant to call for the party to move on and engage in fresh leadership.
All right, I'm delighted that we've been welcomed by Professor John Aldrich. Delighted you could join us, John. Actually, I'm going to turn a bigger picture question to you right now. Our elections showed such deep division in our country, but when you think about it, things really haven't changed that much since 537 votes separated George W. Bush and Al Gore 22 years ago. We're still virtually 50-50 in the Senate, virtually 50-50 in the House. How is it possible to go a generation evenly divided here in America?
So I think we're used to former times when one party would hold a majority for a generation or maybe more, such as the Democrats since the New Deal on up into and what's changed, the principal thing that has changed is that everybody's been included in the electorate. So the biggest change was the inclusion of African Americans into the electorate starting in the 60s, but taking all the way into the 80s for that to come to sort of fruition. So both parties could compete for everybody across the country. And every time the Democrats move in one direction, the Republicans can move in another to counterbalance. A Republican move can be counterbalanced by an equal and opposite reaction by the Democrats. The result is that elections remain close. That's part one. Part two is that while the House is extremely close, in the last few elections, it's been so few seats, hardly any seats are competitive. So this is sort of the other side of that picture, that if you have an evenly divided Republicans and Democrats, the general idea about constructing districts is to create as many as safe for your party as possible. And that means that you use half of your electorate to build your safe seats. And so 90% of the seats are not competitive. And all the fighting is over the small number of seats in each large state that they can't make safe for either party. So for example, in North Carolina, my home state, there were 2 seats that were really competitive out of 14. 10 to 12 of those were very safe. Only 2 were competitive, but it ends up being 7-7 in between Republicans and Democrats.
Interesting. Well, one place where it's definitely competitive is where Ernie is, state of Georgia. Once again, a runoff election, which means that neither candidate made it just over 50%, although they both came very close. Tell us a little bit about this fascinating runoff Senate vote, what it means and how tough it is to rile up the base a second time in just over a month.
Well, as in 2020, Georgia likes to be the center of the electoral universe. So we welcome everybody's comments about that. But, you're right. Georgia, Raphael Warnock, the current senator representing Georgia, is in a tough battle against Herschel Walker, the former football star and native of Georgia. And it's been a tough battle. It's been a very, very heated competition. I mean, I check my mailbox about once a week, and I checked it yesterday, and it was filled with ads. So there's a lot of money coming into Georgia on ads. There's a lot of money, a lot of door knockers. But it's also kind of, both of these candidates are out here trying to rejuvenate their base. It's a very crucial race, and it's very crucial in the sense that the 2 people who are running, these 2 African-American men in the heart of the Deep South, representing 2 polar opposites of what Blackness looks like. And I think that's very important. I think that's on the table right now, and that's a reference. I think this election right here, while it is important to the nation, it's also important as a referendum as to what Blackness looks like and how it is representative in Congress, because you have 2 polar opposite men there.
So, David, this, I assume, is one of the examples you were referring to with candidate quality. A lot of criticism of the quality of the Republican candidate in this vote. First of all, what is this election mean now that the Democrats, no matter what happens, will still be able to control the Senate?
Right. So there are some things in play and some things not. And I think that that's going to impact, voter turnout and voter enthusiasm. One of the things that this is not going to do is put the Senate majority in play. Democrats already have that. But if Raphael Warnock holds on, the incumbent Democratic senator, what that means is Democrats are going to end up gaining a seat in this midterm election. It's not only did they not lose, but they gained. That's going to give them a majority on committees. That's going to give them subpoena power. And that's going to mean that they don't necessarily need the vice presidential tiebreaker every time there is a close vote. In a sense, for those that have been following the Senate over the past couple of years and how Democratic Senators Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona have been able to hold the Democratic agenda hostage at times to try and make it more moderate or more centrist. They're not going to have quite as much power as they have had because they're gaining a seat in Pennsylvania with a very liberal senator, Senator-elect John Fetterman of Pennsylvania. So this seat is more important in some ways for Democrats than it is for Republicans, although Republicans are trying to use everything I just told you as a way to turn out their base. Let's block the Democrats in the Senate from having subpoena power. Let's keep the committee assignments at parity so that it limits how much Democrats can do with their majority. Let's, in a sense, continue to empower Joe Manchin to put the brakes on the most liberal elements of Joe Biden's agenda. And look, I think that for Republicans who suffered a very disappointing midterm election, they didn't need to do that well to win majorities in both houses. They just needed to hold to the historical averages, and they couldn't even do that. I think this would be a shot in the arm for them, given how the midterm elections turned out for them.
All right. When we come back after the break, I'm going to turn to you, John, and ask you about some of these bigger shifts. Georgia becomes fully purple, Florida becomes fully red, and how these states really shift over time in just a moment. Everyone in America seems to have an opinion. What I want more of are facts. As Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the late senator from New York and one of America's greatest public intellectuals, once said, "You're entitled to your own opinion. What you're not entitled to is your own facts." So if you are interested in facts about American politics, especially about public opinion in America, real facts, not fake news, here are 3 resources that I can recommend as reputable, legitimate, responsible sources. Gallup Analytics, Gallup's U.S. daily tracking and world poll data offer poll data region by region and nation by nation to questions on topics such as economic conditions, government and business, health, infrastructure, and education. Roper Center for Public Opinion Research, the world's largest archive of survey data. The Roper Center provides access to cross-national data on public opinion and the problems faced by Americans and people all around the world. And third, Pew Research Center on U.S. politics and policy, public opinion polling, demographic research, media content analysis, and other empirical social science research that informs the public about the issues, attitudes, and trends shaping America and the world. Taken together, these resources provide a mountain of research, some of which can be used to advance arguments from the left, from the right, and everywhere in between. Ideology informed by facts is real argument. Ideology devoid of facts is just hot air. Learn the difference. Again, my guests today include Ernie Suggs. Ernie has reported for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for the past 25 years. A native of Brooklyn, New York, he serves on the board of the Harvard Nieman Fellowship. Also joining us is David Drucker. David is senior political correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Previously, he served as senior editor of CQ Roll Call, an insider newspaper covering Capitol Hill, and as political reporter for the Los Angeles Daily News, covering politics in his home state of California. And joining us for the first time is John Aldrich. He is the Pfizer Pratt Distinguished Professor of Political Science at my alma mater, Duke University. He has authored quite a number of books about American politics, and I'm delighted he can join us from North Carolina. So, John, let me ask you, we've seen not just winners and losers, but we've seen some shifts. Georgia now with another runoff election is firmly purple, balanced pretty evenly. A once red state, firmly purple. Florida, a state that used to be purple, now ran the table for the Republicans, fully red. How do we have these big shifts in important states like Georgia and Florida?
So there's sort of two things. Thing one, if you will, is that Georgia is a good example. Atlanta and its environs is sort of half the state, and the rest of the state is the other half, and that tends, not certainly, but it tends to divide itself between a Democrat and a Republican half, and it was the growth of the Atlanta and environs that made it possible for the Democrats to contest through dominance in Atlanta. That's one, and that's sort of the basic sort of structure of the division between the two parties. But we have to remember that people actually make a difference. Candidates in their campaigns make a difference. Contrast Florida and Michigan, a state that seems to have gone red, a state that seems to have moved from competitive to blue, largely because the popularity of the candidates that they have relative to the opposition candidates, and we're seeing that as candidates emerge as sort of national leaders from the governors, particularly DeSantis of Florida, possibly getting close to being maybe even the front runner, or at least one of the two major candidates for president, and his popularity has helped move an otherwise evenly balanced state, give you 2 or 3 extra points for the strength of the candidates, and you have winning elections.
All right. Well, we've already seen that the elections have triggered change on Capitol Hill with the announcement that Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, will no longer seek leadership in the Democratic Party. And her likely successor, Ernie, is another Black man. You referred earlier to how the two candidates in Georgia represent different ideals of what it means to be a Black man in America today. Well, here's a third Black man who's going to be likely to be the leader of the Democratic Party and potentially a future Speaker of the House, Hakeem Jeffries. Who is he and what does he represent?
Well, Hakeem, first of all, he has big shoes to fill, as David mentioned, following perhaps one of the greatest speakers of the houses that the country has ever seen. So he has big shoes to fill. But I think that Hakeem has put together a nice track record, kind of working in the shadows of Nancy Pelosi, working in the shadows of Clyburn and all those mentors that he has throughout the House, to build to kind of build a foundation that he's going to be trusted by the party, by his caucus.
Thank you so much, Ernie Suggs, David Drucker, John Aldrich, for joining me on Dakhel, Washington. If one were to take a long historical view of world history, America has so much to be proud of. The first democratic revolution, the creation of the first democratic government in modern times, the formation of the longest-lasting political parties in history, the first enshrinement of basic human rights as the foundation of law in secular government, the longest continuous constitutional government in history, and the list goes on. One of the things we are not proud of, however, is the early and full inclusion of women in that national story. Yes, our founding document says all men are created equal, but for far too long we took that literally, privileging men over women in their enjoyment of basic rights. So it was not until 1920, 144 years after our independence, that women got the right to vote in federal elections. The United States only today has, for the first time, a woman serving in the number 2 spot as vice president. It's in this context that we should take a moment, even more than a moment, to celebrate the life, career, and achievements of Nancy Pelosi. She is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, who announced recently that she will give up her leadership of the Democratic caucus in that chamber when it reconvenes in January under a new, narrow Republican majority following our midterm elections last month. In her 2 stints as Speaker of the House, 4 years during the Obama administration and 2 years under the Biden administration, Pelosi was the highest-ranking woman in American history, according to our constitutional line of succession, making her 3rd in line for the presidency after the president and vice president. And rising to that position in the House is the culmination of a lifetime of effort, including year after year of campaigning, legislating, organizing, managing, and leading. In her case, 35 years representing in Congress one of the most liberal districts in America, San Francisco. The House of Representatives is a rough and tumble institution where a loud voice and sharp elbows are usually essential to success. In that largely man's world, her achievement is even more impressive: to rise to the top and to stay there through victory and defeat for more than a decade. And during that time, she was a key player in the governing process, an essential partner to both Obama and Biden. Without her, Obama's headline initiative, the Affordable Care Act, would never have happened. Without her, Biden would not have achieved all those legislative victories that characterized his first 2 years in the Oval Office. In terms of her activity in the Middle East, I did not agree with everything she did. I especially recall her visit to see Bashar al-Assad in 2007, breaking a policy of isolation. But I did respect her willingness to speak truth to power in other settings, such as during her recent visit to Taiwan. So hats off to Nancy Pelosi, a true trailblazer who carved for herself a unique spot in American history. وصلنا إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول تأثير نانسي بيلوسي على السياسة الأمريكية، تواصلوا معي رجاءً عبر تويتر على هاشتاج Inside Washington أو تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. إلى اللقاء في الأسبوع القادم. حتى ذلك حين، شكراً وإلى اللقاء.